Hello and welcome back, and today we're going to do something a little bit different. This is going to be part of a new series of videos about the past in NAS. We're going to talk about some of the, let's be honest, relics that came before the kind of network attached storage and intelligent devices that we are using these days. I want to kick this off with probably one of the oldest things I've got here, and this is the QNAP TS-101. This arrived in 2006 and it is about 1,000,000 years old, or 14, give or take. And they described this as the TS-101 9-in-1. Now this is very much in the early days of home-based network attached storage. For you guys out there, I think a number of you, when you use your very first network attached storage device that was, primarily storage and maybe enjoying your media, it was effectively a hard drive with a little board on it that connected to your network, and it was just seen by the devices in your home or office environment just as a dumb bit of storage. This was kind of one of the first devices that really took advantage of the idea of the device having its own OS, its own software, its own applications, and ultimately being a far more intelligent device than just simple storage. It arrived at about 2 to 250 quid, and it wasn't even one of their top grade models. It was a 1-bay storage device, so this is without RAID, and you can already see a number of the things that have made it through the years into storage, even as far back as 2006. We even got a USB port there on the rear, USB 2 obviously, and it's one touch click. So even now, so a feature that we have kept over all of these years is still evident in something from 2006. Now, I know what you're wondering. When it comes to how much horsepower is inside this device, let's talk about what we always talk about. Let's talk about the CPU and the memory. The CPU inside, I'd never even heard of, to be honest. It was a Freescale 8241. And that's a software on chip, an SoC, with a staggering 266 megahertz of clock speed on that single core processor. What we're saying is nothing. That's honestly, I think I've had calculators more powerful than that, but that's obviously the way things have changed over the years. On top of that, it arrived with a staggering 64 megabytes of memory. So again, this SATA 1 and 2 storage device was kind of the real big entry point for QNAP. They'd already existed prior to that, and I don't think this is their very first ever QNAP. It might be, but I don't think it was. It supported up to QTS 1.2, so it did see a firmware release within inside it, but this featured the original version of QNAP's own software. And yes, I will do a full overview of the original QNAP 1.2 as well. Now, what could the QNAP TS-101 9-in-1 QNAP NAS give you back then in 2006? Well, see if we can get that to stand up without knocking it over. There we go, it's stationary. It provided a number of the key features and functionality that are still used these days. You can forget about things like Plex Media Server. This predates that, and it definitely predates things like transcoding being something that was featured heavily at that time, largely because broadband and network bandwidth speeds were just not what they are now in the home. So these were not things that were done on the fly because they were just not possible. They were done locally and then transported over. But you could use it as a download station, so you could set it up to download your equivalent of your FTP, your HTTPS, and I think there might have even been torrent and NZB far more predominant then, even at that stage, because I do think they were around, but they weren't as polished as they are right now. On top of that, you had things like using it as an iTunes server, because of course Mac had already started booming at that point, so you could utilize the 9-in-1 TS-101 as an iTunes server as well. On top of that, you obviously had it as a file server, and there were larger equivalents of this device that were 2 bays, and I believe there was a 4-bay knocking around at that point as well. It could be used for Apple Time Machine, although nowhere near as fluidly as it can now. There's a whole create an account system and get the Mac to use the credentials to back it up over the network. So it wasn't even, this was already moving away from utilizing local connections like USB and moving over to network. And then on top of that, you had a DLNA media server support as well, which meant that this device was able to stream your media, your movies, your TV shows to your network devices just like you can these days. Now don't get me wrong, once I get this up and running, and I do believe there's a drive inside, once I've got this up and running, chances are it is going to perform terribly, and I'll try to compare it with the way QTS has evolved over the years as well. I know this doesn't go higher than QTS 2.3. So again, right now we're on QTS 4.4.2, I believe, in beta. So a lot of change there. But as an entry point into the world of network attached storage for QNAP, it's pretty impressive. And I like the fact that most of its design has, although the chassis has obviously changed, this chassis was utilized within the Pro series, and the metal externals, the USB copy buttons there, had featured into later generations of this device. And on top of that, if we look at the rear, we can have a look at those ports. Now, we can see a couple of USB ports here at the top. Now, I should have double checked prior to the recording if they are USB 2 or USB 1. So hopefully there's some sort of information bit in the corner of the screen at some point that has told you. But on top of that, we have eSATA. Yes, this is when eSATA was still very much a thing and not just utilized as a means of external and expansion devices for NAS. This was at a point where USB 3, although I think had been released, was incredibly expensive by comparison, and eSATA was still giving you 6 gigabits per second, or technically, because of SATA 1 and 2, you were probably looking at 1.5 gigabits or 3 gigabits overall. And of course, we have that LAN connection, something that has not changed over the years. But ultimately, this device is a lovely reminder of where QNAP came from, because so much of the functionality, even in these early days, was incredibly robust for network attached storage. And moving forward 14 years, they've only got bigger and better. So that has been the TS-101 from QNAP, the 9-in-1. I'm going to be doing a software overview of this device shortly, and I'll be doing even more videos on classic NAS architecture, software and hardware in the coming months between other projects, because it's always fun to juggle, isn't it? If you did enjoy this video, I've got any questions about this device or things you want to see in the software overview, bung it in the comments, and hopefully I'll factor those into the software overview. If you enjoyed it, click like, click subscribe to be kept abreast on all things network attached storage, and indeed any kind of storage, and I'll see you next time.